In the year 1867, a British officer named Charles Warren descended into a dark, narrow shaft near the foundations of the most contested site on Earth. He was not looking for a place of prayer, but for a missing piece of a structural puzzle that had baffled engineers for centuries. Deep underground, lit only by a flickering candle, Warren discovered something that should not have existed. On the lowest course of the massive stone blocks, buried under 30 meters of debris, he found a series of red painted marks. These were not Hebrew symbols, but Phoenician characters, the trade language of the ancient Mediterranean. This single discovery suggested that the wall everyone believed was built by King Herod might have roots stretching back 5 centuries earlier, to a time when the world was a very different place. The Western Wall is often described as a remnant of the Second Temple, but that is a half-truth that masks a much deeper mystery. It is not actually a wall of the sanctuary itself, but a massive retaining structure designed to hold up an artificial mountain. The paradox lies in its construction. How did an ancient civilization, lacking modern hydraulics or steel cables, manage to place stones weighing as much as 570 tons with such precision that not even a knife blade can fit between them? The deeper researchers dig, the more the official timeline begins to crumble. We are looking at an engineering project that was technically impossible for its era, executed by a workforce that officially did not have the tools to do it. Our investigation centers on a single, silent witness, the Magnum Stone, also known as the Master Course. It is the largest building block ever used in the ancient world, located deep within the tunnel system. If this stone was part of a simple construction project, why was it placed so low? Why is its mass equivalent to 2 Boeing 747 aircraft? To understand this, we must follow the trail of the Roman engineers, the Herodian architects, and the modern archaeologists who realized that something was fundamentally wrong with the math of the Temple Mount. The central question remains, what were they truly trying to contain behind these stones, and why did they go to such extreme lengths to ensure it would never move? The investigation began in earnest after the 1967 conflict, when the area was open to systematic archaeological study for the first time in 1,000 years. Archaeologist Dan Bahat and his team started clearing a narrow tunnel along the northern length of the wall. As they removed centuries of packed earth, they encountered their first major conflict. The further they went, the more the ground above them, the densely populated Muslim quarter of the old city, became unstable. The team was working in a subterranean pressure cooker. They were under orders to find the truth, but every stone they touched threatened to cause a diplomatic and physical collapse of the streets above. By the late 1980s, the team reached a point where the walls simply stopped making sense. They found that the stones at the very bottom were not eroded by wind or rain, but were perfectly preserved, as if they had been placed there yesterday. But there was a discrepancy. According to the historical accounts of Flavius Josephus, the wall was completed during the reign of Herod the Great. However, when researchers analyzed the organic material found in the mortar of the northern sections, the dates didn't align. The timeline was off by at least 20 years. This meant that the men who began the project never saw it finished, and the people who finished it were using techniques that didn't appear in the Roman record until much later. The first major confrontation occurred when the team attempted to open a small exit at the northern end of the tunnel to allow for air circulation. This was not a simple construction task. It was a geopolitical detonator. The local authorities viewed the excavation as a direct threat to the foundations of the structures above. The tension escalated into a series of physical confrontations in the streets, resulting in significant societal friction and the intervention of international bodies. The archaeologists were accused of digging a secret tunnel to undermine the mountain. They had the evidence of history on their side, but the reality of the present was closing in. Which historical mystery do you believe holds the key to the modern world's stability? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But then, the first plot twist emerged. While analyzing the base of the wall near the Robinson's Arch, researchers found a stash of coins buried directly beneath the foundation stones. These were not Herodian coins. They were minted during the reign of Valerius Gratus, the Roman prefect of Judea, around the year 17 or 18 of the Common Era. This was 20 years after Herod the Great had passed away. The realization was a shock to the scientific community. The Herodian wall was not Herodian at all in its entirety. The most iconic structure of the ancient world was a patchwork project, finished by the very Roman occupiers who would later attempt to dismantle it. The hero of the story, the master builder Herod, had been given credit for a miracle he never lived to see. As the investigation moved into the 1990s, the focus shifted from who built the wall to how they built it. The economic scale of the project was staggering. Calculations suggest that at the peak of construction, over 10,000 workers were employed daily. The cost in modern currency would exceed $5 billion. But the numbers didn't add up when it came to the logistics of the master course. To move a 570-ton stone from the quarry to the wall, a distance of several kilometers, would require a ramp of such size that it would have filled the entire Tirapuyan Valley. There is no evidence such a ramp ever existed. Technological analysis of the stones revealed another anomaly. The stones are dry stacked, meaning no mortar was used to hold them together. Instead, they rely on a technique called Anathyrosis, where only the edges of the stones are perfectly smooth to create a vacuum-like seal, while the centers are left slightly rough. This is a Greek and Phoenician technique, not a Roman one. It suggested that the engineers weren't just using local labor. They were using a lost school of Mediterranean engineering that specialized in seismic resistance. The wall wasn't just built to stand, it was built to move. The second conflict point arrived when modern geologists joined the investigation. They discovered that the western wall sits directly atop a minor geological fault line. This wasn't a coincidence. Using ground-penetrating radar, they found that the wall's foundation stones are not just resting on bedrock, they are wedged into it in a way that creates a massive structural brace. This led to a disturbing theory. The wall wasn't designed as a religious monument, but as a massive geological patch to prevent the entire Temple Mount from sliding into the valley during an earthquake. The secret was no longer about a temple, but about the very survival of the mountain. The plot took another turn when researchers examined the weeping stones. Occasionally, moisture appears on specific stones in the wall, forming patterns that look like tears. For centuries, this was viewed as a spiritual sign. However, a chemical analysis in the year 2004 revealed a strange reality. The moisture wasn't just groundwater. It contained high concentrations of specific salts and minerals not found in the surrounding limestone. The stones were acting as a giant filtration system, drawing out impurities from the mountain's core. They weren't weeping, they were breathing, processing the internal pressure and chemistry of the earth itself. By the year 2010, the investigation had reached a state of maximum tension. The deeper levels of the tunnels were becoming increasingly dangerous due to rising water levels. The Strouthian Pool, a massive ancient reservoir located beneath the convent of the Sisters of Zion, began to flood the lower chambers. The team was in a race against time. They had discovered a series of ritual rooms dating back to the Second Temple period that had been sealed for nearly 2 millennia. Inside these rooms, they found stone vessels and measuring weights that were perfectly preserved. The hope was that these rooms would contain the architect's archive, the blueprints or records of the wall's construction. One specific room, located directly behind the master course, seemed to be a primary candidate. It was a high-status chamber with ornate carvings that suggested it belonged to the high priesthood or the royal family. The archaeologists were convinced that the answer to the how of the wall lay behind a small, sealed doorway at the back of this room. The world's media gathered as the team prepared to use fiber optic cameras to peer behind the seal. This was the moment of false hope. When the camera finally penetrated the wall, they didn't find archives or gold. They found a void. A massive, echoing chamber filled with nothing but crystal-clear water. The secret of the wall appeared to be an empty tank. The disappointment was crushing for the team. Years of excavation and political risk had led to a flooded basement. The theory that the wall held a hidden library or the Ark of the Covenant was shattered in an afternoon. The investigation seemed to have hit a dead end, and the funding for the deeper digs began to dry up as fast as the hope of the researchers. Then came the third conflict point, the most serious threat to the wall in modern history. In July of the year 2018, a massive stone weighing nearly 400 kilograms suddenly dislodged from the wall and fell onto the prayer platform below. It happened just after a period of intense prayer ceremonies. The incident sent shockwaves through the global community. If a stone that had stayed in place for 2,000 years could simply fall, the entire structure was at risk. The investigation was no longer about the past. It was a desperate battle for the present. Engineers used high-resolution 3D laser scanning to map every millimeter of the wall's surface. What they found was a disaster in the making. The mountain behind the wall was shifting. The patch was failing. The empty chamber they had found years earlier was actually a pressure release valve that had become clogged with modern sediment. The void wasn't a mistake. It was a critical part of the engineering that the modern world had forgotten to maintain. The catastrophe wasn't the falling stone. It was the fact that the entire mountain was beginning to exert a force that the stones could no longer contain. The investigation was at its darkest point. The authorities were considering closing the site permanently for safety reasons. The history, the sanctity, and the mystery of the wall were all on the verge of being buried under a layer of protective concrete. The truth seemed destined to be lost forever, as the risk of a total collapse made further research impossible. The silent witness was about to be silenced for good. But the breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A young graduate student, reviewing the original notes from Charles Warren's 1867 expedition, noticed a detail that everyone had overlooked for 150 years. Warren had described a rhythmic vibration in the air near the master course during a heavy storm. He had dismissed it as the wind, but the student realized it was something else entirely. It was a frequency. The researchers returned to the master course with acoustic sensors. They discovered that the stones were not just placed together, they were tuned. The varying sizes of the blocks, from the massive master course to the smaller stones above, created a weighted harmonic dampener. The ancient builders hadn't just used brute force, they had used the physics of sound. By creating a structure that vibrated at a specific frequency, they allowed the wall to absorb the energy of earthquakes, turning the destructive force of the earth into harmless sound waves. The void they had found wasn't just a water tank. It was an acoustic chamber. When the water level reached a certain height, it changed the resonant frequency of the wall, allowing it to adapt to different types of seismic activity. The falling stone in 2018 wasn't a sign of collapse. It was a sacrificial block, designed to break away when the pressure reached a critical limit, thereby protecting the rest of the structure. The engineering was more advanced than anything we possess today. This realization unraveled the final mysteries. The Phoenician marks Warren found, they were tuning instructions for the stone cutters. The 20-year discrepancy in the coins, it was because the wall was constantly being adjusted and retuned by subsequent generations of engineers who understood its secret. The master course wasn't just a heavy stone. It was the anchor frequency for the entire mountain. The builders weren't just masonry workers. They were masters of a lost science of structural resonance. The final twist is the most jarring. We have always viewed the Western Wall as a monument to a lost temple, a symbol of what was destroyed. But the investigation proves the opposite. The wall was not built to be part of a building. The buildings were built to be part of the wall. The entire Temple Mount was a single, massive machine designed to stabilize a volatile geological zone. We have been praying at the face of a 2,000-year-old earthquake machine, a piece of technology so advanced that we mistook it for a simple pile of rocks. The mystery of the stone that saw everything is not found in the symbols carved on its surface, but in the silence of its survival. Despite every war, every earthquake, and every attempt to pull it down, it remains standing because it was designed to be invincible. The most provocative evidence of this lies in the very bottom course, where a single stone still bears the fresh, sharp chisel marks of a worker who laid it down 2 millennia ago, perfectly preserved by the very pressure it was built to withstand. These stones do not just remember the past, they are still actively holding the world together.